And we are live. Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. Peace, greetings to everyone who has joined us here today. Welcome to Umi's Archive, a 6-part online exhibition drawing on the life of my Umi, Amina Amatul Haqq, to create a space where we can remember and dream. I want to begin, as I always do today, in the name of Allah, for the love of Muhammad, to honor the ancestors and celebration of my people. And as a descendant of stolen people on stolen land, I also want to begin with a land acknowledgement. And I acknowledge that the land upon which we gather is the ancestral and unceded territory of the indigenous nations of Turtle Island. I also begin in acknowledgement of the histories of colonialism, imperialism, and resistance that brought us all here today, and the struggles that are on our minds, from Haiti, Cuba, and Palestine, to France, Burma, Myanmar, and China, that every day is Ashura and every land is Karbala. Today we are launching the 5th exhibit of Umi's Archive, Black Power and Its Legacies, and I'm joined by an esteemed guest, Brother Jihad Abdulmumit. I'm gonna read his bio. Well, first let me greet you. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Jihad, how are you?
Alhamdulillah, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, sister.
Thank you for joining us. So let me read his bio. So Jihad Abdulmumit is a community activist, motivational speaker, author, and playwright. As a youth, he became intensely involved in the Black liberation movement and Vietnam War protests. He joined the Black Panther Party at 16 and eventually went underground in the ranks of the Black Liberation Army. He was a domestic political prisoner and a prisoner of war and served 23 years of his life in prison for his involvement in the Black liberation movement. Currently, he is chairperson for Jericho, a vanguard organization that supports domestic political prisoners, prisoners of war, and calls for their freedom and amnesty from prison. He is also a healthcare provider, working as a community case manager at a free health clinic for HIV-positive inmates upon their release. He has written, directed, and produced dozens of children and adult plays for spiritual, social, and political awareness, motivation, and upliftment. And he and his wife own their own community theater company, Our Children Productions, based in Richmond, Virginia. So thank you again for joining us today, Brother Jihad.
You're very welcome.
Before I get into, so what we usually do, most people who've been with us before, what we usually do is we kind of go through some of the items in the exhibition, and we have a conversation. I have a conversation with the guest, and I want to frame a little bit of this exhibition before we get into that. Right. So each month, there's a different exhibition for Umi's Archive, and each exhibition is tied to a theme, something that's significant to Black life. And so Black Power and Its Legacies is tied to Black August, right? So Black August is an annual commemoration. It started in 1979 by revolution-minded brothers in prison who were inspired by comrades like George Jackson, who was a philosopher, an author. You may know the book Solely That Brother. He was a founder of the Black guerrilla family, and he really modeled what it meant to sort of theorize and organize from captivity. He was killed by California police guards in August of 1970, August 21st. And today actually is the anniversary of the date the state murdered his brother, Jonathan Jackson, who was trying to help George escape because he was under the threat of state murder, which eventually was carried out. And in that inspired by people like George and Jonathan Jackson, Black August came into fruition, and the primary focus of Black August is to honor and commemorate those freedom fighters and political prisoners who have passed on and those who are still living in captivity. And this means educating ourselves and our communities about who they are, and they're linked to broader histories of Black resistance and mobilization. And also mobilizing ourselves to free them all, as they say, free them all. And so that is that Black August is a significant yearly sort of commemoration. And when I thought about talking about Black Power in my mother's life, right, and because she was a part of the Black Power movement of the 60s and 70s, I immediately said, Black August would be a good way to frame this conversation. And so that's kind of the background for this exhibition. So, and the one last thing I'll say about the exhibition is the exhibition has 4 collections, right? There's a collection called Free 'Em All, right, which is about political prisoners, the prison industrial complex. There's a collection called Black Consciousness and Political Organizing. there's a collection called Education is Activism, and there's a collection on Malcolm X. So those are the 4 collections, and we're going to get into some of them, not all of them today. So what I usually do, like I said, is I will share the exhibition beforehand with my guests and then ask them to tell me, what are the pieces of the exhibition that they really kind of struck them. And so when I talked to Brother Jihad, the first thing that he said was this video that we're going to play. So it's a video you're going to see Umi, my mother, talk about how she became Muslim. So let's play that video.
Eventually, I went to Greenhaven Correctional Facility in Stormville, New York. And I remember when I went up there, there were inmates from the Nation of Islam, the traditional Nation of Islam. And there were brothers that were walking around with white kufis on their head. Well, I was always attracted to brothers that had those either red, black, and green kufis, and they had beards, and they always seemed like they had something on their mind. So I spoke to a brother and I asked him what the difference was between Orthodox Islam and the Nation of Islam. He told me to come up the very next day and he would explain. I used somebody's ID. I went right back up to Stormville, New York, which is about a 3-hour bus ride from 125th Street. I wasn't driving at the time. And I went and I spoke to this brother named Jalil. And he was an inmate. He was back on a parole violation. And I met all these brothers up there and their wives who were visiting them. And that was when I really started seriously thinking about Islam. And then the imam at the inmate masjid called Sankore Masjid, which was named after the big great Sankore Masjid in Timbuktu. They had a masjid they called Sankore that the prison administration allowed them to have the special events. And I went up there on the celebration of the Prophet's birthday. They called the Maulid. I went up there on March 23rd, 1975. And although many, many times on my visits, these brothers would say, "Sister, Shahada, are you going to take Shahada?" And I wasn't ready. And then Imam Rasul, who I found out later was one of Al-Hajj Malik's right-hand men, Imam Rasul, a.k.a. Robert 35X, a.k.a. Karate Bob, was the imam there. And I had become friends with his wife, now the late Hagar. And he talked about it. He gave a talk about the grave and about the Day of Judgment. And somehow or other, it really shook me up. Even though the night before I'd been to a party, when I heard that talk about the grave, I remember thinking, maybe I should give this Islam a try. I thought to myself, well, I can always get out of this if I want to. I don't have to stay in this. But I knew whatever I did, Islam was something serious. I didn't want to do it for a man. I didn't want to do it as a fad. I was somebody that always had to be true to myself. So finally I put my hand up and I said I was ready to take my Shahada. And it shocked everybody. My friend Lenore, I think her name was Kenora at the time, she took me to the bathroom, showed me how to make wudu. And I remember sitting up there saying, Ashadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashadu anna Muhammadin abduhu rasuluh. And saying the English translation, bearing witness that there's only one God, Allah, and that Muhammad ibn Abdullah, son of Abdullah and Amina, is his last servant and apostle with the message. And then he told me to put my hand in the Quran. I came up on something saying Amin. So he said, well, that's Amin. You might look for yourself Amina. And that was pretty close towards you, letter A. And then I put my hand back in the Quran and I touched the word Haqq. And that's how I got my Islamic name, Amina Amatul Haqq.
And so, brother Jihad, someone's giving you, a brother named Tahir is giving you the greetings. So that video, right? In that video, my mother narrates how she became Muslim, right? And she talks about and she becomes Muslim in prison, right? Although she's not incarcerated, right? She's going up there, she's visiting, and she also had a Black Power past, right? So she also is part of the movement, and she becomes Muslim. So now you played a very direct role in the Black Power movement, and similar to my mother, you took your Shahada in prison, but under different circumstances. So can you tell us, like, why did that video speak to you, and what is your story?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Again, thank you, sister. I appreciate this video resonated more than anything in terms of the exhibition, because I think that a person's connection with Allah, their creator, is the most powerful thing that you can experience in life and witness. And if you're blessed to be able to do that, then there's nothing that compares with you making that connection and being submissive to the creator, acknowledging and being submissive. And then she had the gumption to go 3 hours back to a prison of all places, and that speaks a lot to the desire that Umi had, which is profound of them within itself. But once again, this resonated with me because it is more the revolution that you can have a deciding effect on is what you do with your own soul and your own life. I mean, we can talk about what's happening in so many parts of the world and be on spot with that, and we should, of course, but the one that you have the most control over is what happens in your own heart, what happens to you, your thinking. And even though we know that Allah creates Muslims and blesses us with this opportunity, but looking at it from a human perspective, your body, this is you, this is the revolution that's going on, me being on top of my desires and my thoughts and my actions, as opposed to trying to control what the state does to Black people of African descent, or our lives, and all these other things that we're battling and struggling to improve on and make better for our existence here. But that is the most profound. And so that is the most profound thing that's ever happened to me in my life. That I, just taking my Shahada. I took my Shahada in a prison. It was Oxford, Wisconsin. I was there for a brief period of time. And before I went to Lewisburg, the more bigger penitentiaries. But I was there, small group of brothers. They didn't allow them to have Juma prayer service. That Juma is the Friday prayer service. Juma means Friday. It's a prayer service that Muslims attend to wherever they are in the world, and that would be taking the place of the second prayer, the Dhuhr prayer, on a Friday. So because the prison administration there did not allow us to have a room and space to congregate to have the Juma prayer service because it's done in congregation, we came out for Asr time, which is the third prayer, the late afternoon prayer, and we gave a sermon, which really wasn't a khutbah. I didn't understand any of this. I thought it was the deal, how it went, but I realized later on that we were just trying to cut and paste and make do where we were at. But I remember the sermon of the khutbah. It was on brotherhood. The brother that gave it was, you could tell he wasn't that well read, but he knew enough to say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. And he talked about brotherhood, misused a couple. I remember everything about it. I remember brothers coming out the bathroom dripping wet water, and then there's no chairs here. Like, there's something going on. Maybe should I go get them? The chairs, we need some folding chairs up in here. Everybody's just so Muslim may take that for granted, sitting on the floor. But when you're not a Muslim, that was so different. To sit on a carpet and everybody's sitting there to listen to a person. So now we're all used to that. So we don't think twice about it. Alhamdulillah. But that was that. And then the call of the Adhan, this mystical thing. And everything resonated by the grace and mercy of Allah. And they gave me some threefold pamphlets to read. I read them that night. Came back the next day. They were surprised I read them. Yeah, I read them, I read them, actually. Did you read them? No, I just joke. I read them. It's on Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and on what is Islam, the basic tenets, those type of pamphlets. And being that I'm coming out of the Black Panther movement, tell me when I'm talking too long, sister. But one of the philosophical ingredients of the Black Panther movement was that we resonated with the principle called materialism and the dialectical method. Okay. So it's a Marxist-Leninist movement primarily. And materialism meaning we vibe off of the material world, all right, kind of leaving alone the spiritual thing. And dialectics is the study and observation and practice of knowing things in the interconnection of one another. And so I say that to say that when somebody presents something to me, or it's an issue or a challenge or whatever the case may be, I'm looking for the opposite. I'm looking for the contradiction in that. It helps me to understand the nature of the very essence of what we're dealing with. So quite naturally, when I read these pamphlets, I'm looking for the contradiction and some misrepresentation. I'm looking detail, maybe more so than somebody else. I'm really matching this with this principle of dialectics. You know? Mm-hmm. Then, you know, so it met the standard. I'm like, I'm the one, right? Allah's the one. I'm the one. I'm going to tell you if this is right or not. All right. So just joking on that, but I'm going to tell you in my own mind. So I was like amazed how that, because, you know, all the time I was in the Panthers, I still believed in God, but I rejected the notion of Christianity because at that time my mother really was into Christianity, my father and then the Cultural Revolution, I'm a product of that. Black Power, James Brown really brought that out with his song, I'll say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud, which was pivotal in that movement. That one song did so much as far as setting it out there to say it loud and clear. And so that was all about what Jihad, Abdulmumit, myself, but that was what I was about. So if you're going to tell me that the Lord and Savior of us all is white, blonde hair, and blue eyes, you know what? You can't even get past the front door with me on that one.
Right.
And ignore all the history about his complexion and who he really was. I knew that wasn't right. And then the person telling me this is my oppressor, the face of the oppressor anyway, a white person. And that's, and I, you know, and so anyway, I rejected that. So I kept the belief in God buried somewhere in my heart. So I went on with this whole Marxist thing. And I say it like that, not to disrespect comrades and sisters and brothers that are Marxists, but I went with that, not really believing in that, but it gave a critical analysis of social political reality that we are faced with in a place called the United States in America and the whole world for that matter. But when I heard this message of Islam and how the Prophet Muhammad said Islam is history, how he was unlettered in the 23 years it took to reveal this book and how it was documented and the scribes and all the details that went into it. It was, and there's no images to talk about, you know, black person neither. There's no image of a black person on the wall or a white person or Asian person or Arab. It was none of that. It was strictly on the principle and the belief of who Allah says he is and who the Prophet Islam was. And so that's what captured me. And your mom, evidently, it captured her too, to the point that she would travel 3 miles, get somebody else's ID, go into a prison of all places. A lot of people trying to get the heck away from the prison. Who's going into the prison. And a lot of things, I'm going to shut up after this. So much happens in the prison as far as individuals' growth and development. You can look at Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, and we come out giants. And a lot of people have come out giants. And a lot of giants were created and evolved in prison. Some did not come home. Some were slain. We mentioned George Jackson being one of them. And so many, you know, I mean, people coming out of prison, we recognize the fact that you can be tremendous leaders. Nelson Mandela, I mean, you could be the president, maybe not here, but maybe so. You never know how things would go 50 years from now if the planet's still alive around. But you never really know. But prisons are an incubator for growth and development and finding yourself under that type of oppression. So there, I'll leave that there.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. You know, there's so many things that you said that also, you know, there aren't in that video clip, but my mother also shared with me. So similarly speaking, I think, you know, she talks about, you know, when she first heard about Islam, she was a student at Ohio State University, and she says that some brothers from the Islamic Party of North America had come to Ohio State, and they were trying to give dawah, but she was like, as far as she was concerned, the Arabs enslaved the Africans, so she didn't want no parts of that, right? And then she also didn't want no parts of Christianity because that was a white man's religion, right? So she was very much involved, but she felt like the movements, right, the lack of a spirituality, right, the lack of this kind of was something that she still yearned for, right? So there was this thing of like, and it's way similar to your own story, right? There's like, okay, I believe in God. I don't want these other things, and I'm looking for something. And in her search, right, Islam then becomes the place where everything kind of comes together for her, right? I think in ways that are similar to yours. And the reason why even the prison story, you know, so, you know, you talk about the prison, and this is the thing I think about prisons, like how they impact Black life, right? Like there's such a significant impact of the prison as an institution on Black life that is negative, right? But there's also, like you said, this cultivation that's happening despite, right, despite the conditions people are in, right? And in some way, even though she was not incarcerated, she also shared in that, which I think, and then in general, the reason why there's a free and all collection in the exhibition is because I didn't even realize this until after she passed, until after I was in the archive, how much, right, the prison was a part of her own sort of growth and development, which we'll talk about as we go on. So I want to move to the next piece that struck you, and this is
eventually
it's the Clifford Glover. So in 1973, right? Yeah. So 1973, the NYPD killed a young black boy. His name was Clifford Glover. He was 10 years old. It was an early Saturday morning. He was in South Jamaica, Queens with his stepfather going to work. His stepfather was like a mechanic. And so they're walking and they're on their way. He's taking his stepson with him to work. And you can show the image now. So he's taking him to work, and the police, so apparently someone robbed some taxi cab, right, in that area. The police are looking for the person who robbed the taxi cab, and they stop Clifford and his stepfather. And they claim, right, that Clifford pulled out a gun and shot at the police, which is why the police shot him. Like, this was a claim that they made at the time. And the reason why I discovered this story, which, is eerily familiar to so many stories that I've lived through. So this happened before I was even born, but, so familiar. The reason why I heard about the story is because, like, in 2014, I'm driving my mother. We're actually in Queens, just driving down the street, and I'm asking her a question. I don't know how it came up. I don't remember. But she's basically, like, telling me what happened. And so I asked her what they did. And in the exhibition, there's an audio. You can hear her say this herself, but I'll just read you a little bit of what she said. So I asked her what they did, and she said, rioted. She's like, they tore up South Jamaica. Of course, it was the projects that really rioted. Some of us were so mad with all the police brutality that was happening at the time that we had. I joined the African Liberation Support Committee, and we decided to boycott Gert's department store, to put pressure on Gert's, because Gert's was a big contributor to the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce. And the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce dictated a lot of the behaviors of the police on 103rd, on the 103 precinct. So we had a whole thing about boycott Gert's. And we were reading out literature, talking to people all day long, why we wanted Gert's boycotted, how related to the taking of the young Clifford Glover's life and the lives of so many other African-American males. And so in the actual exhibition, you can hear her full conversation about Clifford Glover. But that, I remember listening to her and listening to both what happened, which was so similar, but also how herself and the people she was organizing with, how they responded, right, to both the kind of the sort of the rebellion that happened, right, and then also the organized kind of like response as well. So I put that exhibition, I put this in here for that reason, but I know this spoke to you, Brother Jihad. So can you want to tell us, what memories, do you remember Clifford Glover? Do you remember when this happened? Or
in 1973, I was in the Black Panther Party and actually that was around the transition time of going into the Black Liberation Army at that particular time. So just as a little historical connection there, Sister Suad, is, the Black Panther Party was predicated on community defense, against police brutality and violence. And Huey Newton and Bobby Seale and the comrades with him at that particular time in Oakland would shadow and follow the police on calls and stop when the police stop you, to make sure that people African descent had their rights and knew their rights, the Miranda rights. You have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be held against you in a court of law. You have a right to an attorney, to make sure that people have the muster and strength to be able to exercise this so-called right. Because a lot of times when the pressure of the police is on you, you might do things that you just don't feel, what's in your car. Somebody may, what's in your pocketbook, here, they don't have a right to check that. So anyway, so that's what we did. And obviously it became confrontational right away with the police. So the whole thing of police brutality and police killing us, April 6, 1968, little Bobby Hutton was assassinated by the police. So it's always been a litany of people, everybody that in contemporary times is familiar with, if George Floyd murder didn't bring it home, where people would cause them to research, to remember the names. It's like forget about it. And the historical continuity of police killing us from the Patty Road, from the slave plantation. Oh, you escaped, or maybe you just did something that they accuse you of to castrate you. How many bodies at the bottom of the lake? How many necks stretched from a tree? How many people shot or knifed or beaten to death from 400 years now, really, since, allegedly clocking it from 1600s to now. And it still goes on. Yes, indeed.
Because I remember, I feel like I've heard, because I recently interviewed you for something else. I know. So police brutality was also something, like you had a very direct, like, interaction with the police that led you into the movement, right? Can you tell us about that?
Yes, indeed. I remember telling you that. Yes. So I am 66 years old now. So 50 years ago, when I was 16, I joined the Black Panther Party. But what I'm not know if this incident actually happened when I was 15 or probably when I was 16. August 30th is my birthday. So, but anyway, my father, my brother, my older brother, my father, I'm from Plainfield, New Jersey, raised in Plainfield, New Jersey. I am from New Jersey. And the police brutality is a main issue. You can see it in the rebellions across the United States. Almost every summer, you can predict something happening in cities going up in flames and smoke, so to speak. So one day, I don't know the reason why. I can't remember the reason why. The tail light out didn't make a signal, turn your signal light on to make a turn. The police stopped my father, my brother, and I, got us out the car and sat on the curb, just like in Los Angeles, South Central. South Central is Plainfield, New Jersey, and Plainfield, New Jersey is South Central. And so they put a gun at that time. The police had 38s. They put a 38 to my dad's head. And I was so petrified, I wetted my pants. And I felt so bad about that I didn't have the courage. I mean, what was the courage? That may not even be the right way to explain it. But I felt myself like just crumbling inside with fear that my dad's going to be shot. And all the things you've been seeing on TV is happening to us right now. And then can't remember exactly how it ended, but they were gone, and we got in our car and drove away, just adding to our trauma and the trauma collectively of our people. That's what happened to us. That's how that day went. But that sparked me. And at the same time, I'm seeing these images of these robust sisters and brothers in black with TAMs, defying the police, weapons, that type of strength. I'm saying, I am going straight over there. And I did. I joined the Black Panther Party. Skipping over some things, we established a chapter in Plainfield, New Jersey. It was a big chapter, all young people. I mean, I'm in high school. And my comrades, Ashanti Austin was one of them I grew up with. He's also the treasurer of Jericho. So he's one of the individuals. I bring his name into the space because he's one of the few individuals I grew up with in this power movement that I'm still work with every day.
What was his name again?
Ashanti Austin. Ashanti Austin. Yes, indeed. I love that brother to death. Anyway, all of them were our age, 20. I mean, so even Huey Newton's, they were in the mid-20s. I think the older ones of us in the movements of Haj Malik al-Shabazz and Malcolm X's and the Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., they were both assassinated when they were 39, but back it up, 39, 38, 37, 36, 35, all their activism and what they did, how young they were. And so those movements, those powerful movements that existed then, they were young. When I say young, so now I say young, somebody said, Jihad, are you talking about somebody that's 50 because you're 66? So when I say young, I'm talking about young. I'm talking about teenagers and young adults in their 20s that carried the day with the struggles and the movements, and not just the Black Panther Party, but the Republic of New Africa, the Young Lords, the American Indian Movement, and all the other organizations that existed at that time. Everybody is very young. And where are the young today with that type of caliber? That's not a criticism. It's just a question. So if you felt some way about it, they say if you throw a rock at a pack of dogs and one that hits, yells every time. So if you yelp, I got you.
So speaking of abuse, actually, I want to move to this letter that's in the collection, and I want to ask you. I'm going to read a little bit of the letter, and then I'm going to ask you about this. two. So there's a letter that's in the collection. My mother wrote in November of 1971. So November of 1971, she was 21 years old, right? And so it's a long letter, and I have a section of it is on this exhibition. So some of the things she says, first, one thing she says on this one page that's on the screen, she says, Kathleen Cleaver, wife of Elbridge Cleaver, spoke at Ohio State today. She related her experiences to us. She considers herself part of the International Panther Party. She said that the faction Huey Newton is leading is not the true party of the people. Remember the split in the Panther Party? She said a lot of things. What she spoke about was true. The USA is the imperialist pig, policeman, and oppressor of the world. Violet, that's what she's writing a letter to. We are living in the belly of the beast. We are living in the most racist, despotic, slick, sly, degenerate system in the world. That's one thing she says in the letter. She also says in the letter, she gives this breakdown. She's like, dig. North, Congo of Zed, and Butu, who was an Uncle Tom lackey who was selling out to the imperialist crackers. South, People's Republic of the Congo, Lumumba's country. Remember the CIA killed Patrice Lumumba in 1961, but his thoughts lived on. And then towards the end of the letter, she says, I hope there are some John Browns left, talking about white folks, right? She goes, that's the only kind of white people we should relate to. The rest are, excuse my French, bullshitting, right? 98% are BS. There's no future in this country except to destroy the racists and this government. Politics, black mayors, senators, etc., black capitalism, BS, and dope reform, prison reform are all BS programs. Their games, the man is running in us to have us believe in this BS country. Remember, the concentration camps are being repainted. Remember, dope addiction is increasing. The only people going to jails are together brothers and sisters. No one in the mafia is going to jail. No pimps or prostitutes are going to jail. Remember, 98% of white folks either hate you or don't care about you. There are wars going on in prisons in Wilmington, North Carolina, Cairo, Illinois, Columbus, Ohio, etc., etc., etc. And the letter goes on. The letter had a profound impact on me reading it because she's 21 years old, right, when she's writing this. And there's a real sense of a political education she has, right? She's talking not just about stuff that's going on, in Columbus, Ohio, where she is, or New York, where she's from, but she's talking about things that are globally, right? And she's giving an analysis, right, of social programs, of government programs. And I feel like I remember being 21. I feel like I was smart. I don't know how I feel like I was smart and well read. But I feel like that, and this is my question for you, right? When you was reading this letter, because you were younger than my mother, right, at this time in 71 when she was writing this, but you also had a political education and you talk about this. So I'm interested in what did it mean to be that young? What were the kind of things you guys were doing? Learning, reading, to be able to have an analysis that you did, to be able to do the kind of things that you were a part of. Despite being young, what we think about, at least today, what we think of the capacity, right, of a young person is.
Wow. Yeah. When I read that letter and just listening to you now, Yomi definitely is my comrade. She's definitely the comrade. No, I say that very sincerely. That analysis is definitely a Panther analysis. It is a correct and accurate analysis. It still remains true today, and it still resonates with me today. And so I come out of a generation that was, and your mother too, by her age, that was impacted by the Cultural Revolution. Mm-hmm. And this cannot be overstated. The Cultural Revolution. That means that in our music, our dance, and you can point out different aspects where immediately mainstream society tried to exploit it, Black's exploitation films and all of that. But getting down on the street level, the Cultural Revolution, wearing your hair natural, your clothes, your African dress, your identity with Africa, even on a street level. Oh, hey, brother, people giving you the, as opposed to, hey, dog, what's happening? Honoring our sisters as queens and the queens honoring the brothers, and us trying to live up to a certain standard and quality of behavior and conduct that was proud of who you are, right, and the fullness of your lips and the blackness of your skin. And so if my experience is that's the foundation of it all. Mm-hmm. And then reading, there was no these devices here where you just can superficially surf an answer to a question. For example, this morning I went back and looked at just Googled again Clifford Glover, because I couldn't remember what part of New York that was, even after looking at it on there. And I just wanted to look. Let's say I'd never heard of Clifford Glover at all. And I said, I want to look up Clifford Glover. And I read the little paragraph on my cell phone. Well, that might be the extent of it. There was no context. And so that happens with a lot of things that's going on now. So we don't read books. We look at Instagram and get our reports most of the time misinformation, or because an accurate tidbit of information could turn out to be misinformation if it's not put in the proper context. So you may not still understand it, and it may be skewed because you have no foundation. So my comrades and I, 16 and 17 in high school, coming out for lunch, 45 minutes for lunch, meet out in the park, whip out our Mao Zedong's quotations, a red book we call it, or any other book, Julius Lester, To Be a Slave, John Hope Franklin, history books before the Mayflower. I'm talking about, I've read John Hope Franklin. This is a Sisters and Brothers. This is an old history book. I know they got a whole bunch of other history books, From Slavery to Freedom. I've read that book 3 times.
Wow.
That's a history. That's a textbook. Do you feel what I'm saying? That's a textbook. I didn't read it for college. I didn't go to college till I was in my 50s. That's not a homework assignment from school. That's me reading it. I read from Lerone Bennett history book. I've read that once, at least a whole once. That's more of a paperback like that. But that type of reading, we used to pride ourselves in memorizing Malcolm X's speeches. You got to memorize this on our own. From the ballad to the bullet, and be able to say that to Sonia Sanchez and Nikki Giovanni. The poetry was slamming and bumping, and to be able to get up and just recite a poem. This was the pride we took in reading, and I surmised, and Allah knows best, that your mom was a product of that same type of thinking, to be able to write that type. And then she wrote it. Who even writes today? Mind you, now there's a lot going on with this. Who writes a letter? And if you write a letter, what's going on with that? You send a card to a prisoner, maybe. To somebody else. You may send a card. If you even do that, now you can text them an emoji and a smiling face on the phone, and the whole art of writing letters is kind of dissipating. So our scholars and those that will articulate our experience, I think that's kind of like in jeopardy. Those that would tell stories following the African tradition, that type of transmitting of information and share of information and stories, our history. So that resonated with me, sister. Now, just real quickly on the split in the party with Kathleen was saying about that with Huey and Eldridge Cleaver. I want to say that I am that hurt me so bad. But in the moment of it, obviously I'm on the East Coast. I sided with the East Coast Panthers, Eldridge Cleaver and all of them, and Huey Newton. But for real, when you look back on all that history, sisters and brothers, we were played. We were played. They was able to inject information, our egos. They pumped up our egos. They misinformation. We're calling each other names and profanities across national mediums. The FBI and the counterintelligence program is applauding that. There was a lot of gunplay and violence. This is the history. It's very painful to talk about, but tell no lies, claim no easy victories, as Amilcar Cabral has said. So we want to keep it real because there's a lesson in that. How our egos play such a role, how the FBI was able to implant its counterintelligence program and divide us so much. And so, but yes, we got played on that. Unfortunately, the legacy of the Panthers, that would be the lesson. The legacy, the other lesson is for community development, how we were in the midst of our community to build them. And that's one of the things that's so remiss with the movements today, protesting the government, protesting the slave master, asking them to have a better policy for us, asking them not to shoot us, which needs to be done. So I'm making this being kind of cynical about that, but that needs to continue. But what's bad is that we're not in our own communities to develop and make real the sense of self-determination. And we are our own liberators, as Jalil Muttaqin always says, to be able to identify and build our own communities like we were trying to do in the Black Panther Party. Some of those demonstrations today won't even go near the hood. They're up there on the campus, on Main Street, Broad Street, and places like that. Even though a killing may have taken place in the hood, they kind of migrate and go out to where, you know, the supermarkets and the malls and tear up and cut up. And we're not in our communities addressing our own devices, fratricide and drugs and things of this nature that's ravishing our communities. Therefore, we have no respect from anybody around the world. And we're just talking heads on it. Yes.
Yeah, you know, so one of the things, so there was a question I want to, someone asked. So, because what I'm compelled about you saying, even the memorization of writing, because also in the exhibition, there's it's a piece of paper where mother wrote down some quotes from like Malcolm X, and I was wondering, you're giving me context now to understand why that is. It's like, why, you know, what was going on in terms of that? But there was a question, I think, related to the study you're talking about. And, you know, in Black August, and I should say this before I forget, I want to apologize to folks. We have been able to have ASL interpretation for our streams, but today didn't work out, but we will have the captioning as soon as it's back up on YouTube. So I wanted to make that point. But, you know, the Black August is study, fight, fast, train, right? Like those are the principles of Black August. And so this question of study and what you're reading and reading a lot, and to be able to have this kind of analysis, right? Irrespective of how old you are, right? With study, that kind of clarity can come. So the question is that you mentioned you found no contradictions between the Marxist principle of dialectical materialism in Islam. And so the question is whether or not you still consider yourself a Marxist. This is the question.
Right. Found no contradiction in the principle of dialectics in Islam. You can drop the Marxism off if I wasn't clear. And Allah said he created everything in pairs. He said that in 2 places. That's it. Everything is a contradiction. Now, when you think about that, you may think about male and female. I think oppressor and oppressed, rich and poor. I take it to another different level. There's a contradiction in everything Allah created, and science bears it out. You cut a magnet in half, north and south pole, cut it in half, it's still north and south pole, cut it in half, north and south pole. All the way down. That contradiction remains. It could be antagonistic or it could be non-antagonistic. When we talk about social political affairs, it can be very antagonistic and it evolves and changes. So dialectics is always the fluid motion and the evolution of change. And you could be talking about biology or anything, you know, sociology, politics, economics. It's always there. That's what resonated with me. Not so much the Marxist part about not believing in God. I've been dropped that. I never accepted that, actually. So I am not a Marxist, to answer the question, by no means. I'm a Muslim. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. But those principles brought me into my scrutiny of Islam. Like that's why I was making a kind of like a joke about I'm the one that's going to tell you if it's right or wrong. But I was just being facetious. I hope the questioner realizes that. But you coming into Islam, you also do your own examination. However, I'm saying how I did mine. Anybody that takes your Shahada is thinking about, if you're coming out of Christianity, you're kind of parlaying that with what your past beliefs were, not unless you just appeared on the planet at that day and moment and became a Muslim. Certainly not. You're bringing in all of your thinking, your experiences, what your uncle told you or what happened 2 summers ago, and how your family may be Jewish and now you're this, or you may have been nothing. We didn't even go to church. I'm bringing in what I brought in. So everybody's going to bring in what they brought in to one degree or another. I was just sharing what my history has been and why I scrutinized and looked at Islam the way I did. And dialectics was my bridge into that.
Yeah, I think I appreciate your answer in that question too, because the next thing I wanted that you had mentioned that spoke to you was this flyer that is in the exhibition for Muslims for Reparations, and we'll show the flyer. And there was an event from 2004, right? That had a series of speakers, including Brother Yusuf Nuruddin, who's a scholar, Imam also Asha Samad, who's a scholar, and then Imam Ayub Abdul Baki, who was an imam from a masjid in Queens. And it was held at the African Poetry Theater, which I think is actually closed. Hashtag gentrification. But it was a central space of a lot of kind of like conscious Black activity in Queens, New York. And so they had this event. And I think, this point about Marxism and just like, I think it was interesting to me about the connection I see and just thinking about ideas is that, we talk about the legacy of these movements, right? And so many people who were part of the Black Power movements become Muslim, right? There are lots of people who become Muslim. And so I guess the question is, or at the point is, they're not just eschewing what they had before, right? But it's bringing them to Islam, and then they're using it potentially, right, as ways of continued understanding, but as Muslims who are doing that. And so I think it's interesting because this flyer, and I want to ask you like why this flyer stood out to you, but the reason why I wanted to include it was because I think that reparations is a long conversation, right? A long sort of like conversation in the Black community, in the diaspora, not even just in the US, right? The call for reparations. And it's something that has picked up lately in some like social media conversations, but not necessarily something I've seen the Muslim community as a whole talk about, right? And so when I saw this flyer, I was like, this is really interesting because this is like almost 20 years ago, you know, and there's this is engagement. And now we're, you know, we tend to think of, you know, progress, right? The more you go forward, the more you get progressive. But I feel like there's less engagement with something as important as reparations now. So that's why I wanted to include it, right, in the exhibition. But I'm interested in kind of your thoughts on, you know, what about this, you know, I guess spoke to you?
Woo-wee. So this may be the most controversial part, which I'm going to Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My take on this whole thing is that we've relinquished our vanguard posture as Muslims of African descent in this country. And you may see things pop up here and there, but in terms of having a developing infrastructure to be able to address these issues, put them on front and center, and take control of this narrative, a lot of times we've just relinquished that. And so, out of no disrespect to anybody, so this is just my opinion, and everybody has their opinions are like birthdays. Everybody has one, and don't tell me you don't. But what happens in this country is that people of African descent that are Muslims face the same challenges, forms of oppression, exploitation, social degradation, marginalization as Black people in general. Mm-hmm. And so that whole whammy has been draped. And then there's the influx of a lot of immigrant Muslims with money and resources. And now you have big Islamic centers and most masjids that are predominantly African descent. They're holding the toe in poverty. Storefronts can't just seem to get out of it. Now that takes a whole analysis within itself. But that issue, so therefore you're not going to find the issue of reparations in any Islamic center probably. Because you're thinking that, you know, the whole notion of an Islamic state is not even mentioned no more after 9/11. That's when the FBI be at your door. You're not going to talk about that, right? You know, or anything about. And then secondly, Islam as a state, as a nation, you look around the world, there's no examples that you can point to with really pride and this and that. We're not helping each other. We're killing each other. We're siding with the non-Muslims. We're not helping the Palestinians, people in Saudi Arabia, all that money. You're not feeding anybody. I'm done with you myself. And I'm done in the sense that, and I'm disappointed that we haven't been able to muster the strength and unity, because that's also the drape of colonialism. Our disunity is a reason for that, and why we don't trust each other, and why we just can't get it together. And I'm saying a lot right now, and I know I'm not going to be able to do justice to this, but we lost that narrative. It's a different type of Islamic narrative that wants to be a part of society and be good people. And the thing about that is that a lot of that is Islam. You do want to be the good neighbor. So it's all mixed with, but the political connections is really skewed. The whole notion of doing for yourself and self-determination and establish Islam now, because you look around the world, what is the Sharia? Oh my gosh, women can't even drive in this place, and they're being abused, and they're being raped, they're being forced into marriage. They don't have no rights, they're disrespected, they get shot in the head if they try to go to school. The Taliban did this to Yusuf, what the sister's name, I can't remember right now. And all these examples of like what's going on with the Muslims. Alhamdulillah, Muhammad Rasulullah, you are with your wealth. You have not served the people, and you're going to have to wear that around your neck on the day of judgment, and Allah knows best. As far as African-American Muslims, African descent in this country, you know, our disunity, our small town thinking, you know, lack of infrastructure, our impoverishment, you got to be concerned with the rent and just, excuse me, we can't seem to get a grasp on where we should be going and how we should do it in any unified way. So we would relinquish the microphone and wallow in our poverty, trying to pay our bills and don't be evicted. and this is a lot to be said. And I like I said, I can't do justice. And I know people listening probably have a lot to say about that too. This is indeed the most controversial question you asked. But we've given it. So reparations, who going to talk about what? I believe it. Matter of fact, I'm involved in many initiatives. I'm not, by the way,
Okay.
I'm not a talking head. Everything I said, I'm connected with a movement, a group of people, a jamaat, and I'm connected. And I don't really hold credence to anybody that says anything on any platform that's not connected. We don't need another talking head. I'm on the ground every day with everything that's come out of my mouth. I just want to let you know that. And I can get very strong with that and forceful in my own way. So my history is the Black Liberation Army. I don't know what yours is, but that's mine. So I don't come in a state of weakness. We've lost that narrative. We have to gain it back. It's an ongoing struggle. We're fighting in many different communities to do that. And that flyer resonates with me, Sister Suad and listeners, because we have to regain that narrative. Reparations, what form it would take, and how. So if somebody talks about reparation, they ask you a deep question. Well, how would you get it? So, oh, you don't even know. So that means, so that's kind of like for the person that's trying to advocate for that, because they can't answer these detailed questions, kind of like fall in the background because you caught me out there. Well, we have to collectively decide that through an infrastructure, development of infrastructure where it can be addressed collectively. You jamming somebody up on the corner or in the mosque or on some debate because they can't answer that question does not take, you can't answer the question about healthcare. We need better health care. What do you think is the health care plan besides asking some racist congressman about developing a better health care for us? Do you have an answer?
Right.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
No, you don't. You don't have an answer for that neither. If you did, you're guilty of sitting on it. And so when somebody talks about the thing about reparations, and they may not have all the details lined up and the ducks in a row to be able to explain to it from A to Z how it should manifest itself and play out and who should get it and this and that and how we can vet it out. And he said, oh, man, you don't even know what you're talking about. But you don't know what you're talking about healthcare. So just die of cancer somewhere. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Brother Jihad, what you said was really powerful. I think you started with, Muslims of African descent. You said they lost their vanguard position, right? Or position, right? This idea of playing a role of leadership around issues of concern, right, to Black people, right? And that was definitely something that I think, for my mother, that was definitely part of why she came into Islam, and she continued to organize and be. So that's why she would have a flyer like that in her archive, because she would have been at that meeting. She might have been at other meetings, they had, right?
Indeed.
Reparations is the kind of topic that does, directly make us think about, right, our condition and what is due and what is owed and what other type of things that there needs to be a reckoning for, right? So it's interesting because I actually didn't think that was the controversial question, but after you and your response,
indeed it is controversial in the sense of Muslim African descent from this country, indigenous Muslims in this country, indigenous Muslims in general, whatever, our European sisters and brothers also, but we've lost that narrative to the foreign narrative. And working together in Islam and not making a ruffle and working along with the police and all that. And I'm not saying you should in certain circumstances at all. I mean, whatever's peculiar to your neighborhood, you also do that. But the whole notion of self-determination and recognizing who the oppressor is and being able to call them out on that, because you may jeopardize whatever you're going to jeopardize. I'm not going to go there. There's too much to say. If I say one thing, it opens up another 10 things to be said. But that narrative has been lost. It's been depoliticized. Everything is said to have to be politically correct. And we're in a very precarious position even today, in spite of the efforts of many good sisters and brothers. And this is not to slight the brothers and sisters in the Islamic Center, because I go to the Islamic Center myself. I do khutbahs at them. I'm just giving you, so it's not a condemnation. It's just an observation. It's an observation of where we are in the place called the United States of America. Somebody has a program, they're going to call them Imam of Islamic Center, and they're not going to probably look like me. They're definitely not going to sound like me. And you're not going to call Jihad Abdulmumit, because just the way I'm sounding right now, maybe, oh God, you still there? And I recognize that. So yes, I'm still there. I'm still there. And my legacy is going to be left too. So just like a hand coming out the grave, you catch my grandchildren, they're going to be at you.
right. So,
Inshallah.
inshallah. So I think the next thing I want us to talk about before we close is there's a collection called Solidarity in this exhibition, or an album rather, called Solidarity in this exhibition. And it includes correspondence between my mother as a college student and brothers who are in prison. When she was in college in Ohio State, this is around 72 and 73, she was a part of artist groups, right? And they would go into the prisons. They went to Chillicothe Correctional Facility in Ohio, Mansfield in Ohio, and do performances. And then also, so for example, the yellow letter that's on the screen, this is in that letter, a man named Arthur wrote to her, and he sort of thanked them for the performance, and he wanted to communicate. There's another letter from a man named Wanza in there, and then also she received a flyer from there was a Black Culture and History group in the Chillicothe prison, and they sent her a flyer for to come to an event they were hosting. And so I had a conversation with her then college boyfriend about this, and he said that they were also part of this program that came out of the University of Ohio State. He would go into the prison, they would bring people who were close to parole out, right, bring them to campus, they would have a lunch, they would basically get them enrolled so that when they got out of Ohio State, and when they got out of prison, they would be able to matriculate into Ohio State University. And I was really struck in this collection with the correspondence. And one of the things that Jefferson Gwynn, her boyfriend from college, said is that, she would write letters, and she was like, that's a really good thing to do. He would say, it's a really good thing to write letters to people who are incarcerated. And I'm interested because you spent 23 years, right? Sort of incarcerated in prison because of your commitment to Black liberation. And I'm interested in sort of, this question of letters and letter writing, and not just the letter itself, but just also what kind of relationships, right, should we who are on the outside, right, be ensuring that we're cultivating, right, with people who are sort of in captivity, right? Like what does that mean to the person who's in captivity, and what can we do, or what should we be doing that we're not doing now, right? For our brothers and sisters who are in captivity.
Right. So, Bismillah, to the point, inshallah. So, letter writing is very important. By the way, I'm looking at the colors of those cards and letters. So, if anybody's not familiar with writing letters, that's changed. On white paper, black and blue ink, white envelopes, no stick labels or anything like that under the guise of the intervention of bringing drugs into a prison. So, all those cards and stuff like that, you may not be able to do state and federal prisons. So, make sure if you do write somebody that you check with the prison on their website of the conditions of writing a letter. Just want to let that be known. After Attica, the connection with the community and the prison was broken quite a bit. You can go on a hunger strike in prison and get everybody in the world to support you. Now you go on a hunger strike, you might be dead up in there, or they'll force feed you and you may not know. So the government, the state, the powers that be, our own devices, we've dropped the ball a lot on that. It used to be the prison movement. The prison movement was a movement of and within itself. And the community, and so it mirrored the movement on the streets, that progressive Black liberation movement, the community movement hand in hand with what's going on in prison. And I mentioned the Black liberation movement because that was pretty much the only movement that was supporting people in prison of any significance. That's why I mentioned that, just to let you know. And so that connection there. So as the Black liberation movement kind of dissipated, and so did the movement in prison. Older people were finally released or died or whatever, got out of prison, and the demographics started to change. That built up to a certain degree in the 80s and the 90s again, but now it's kind of tend to fall off. When I was in prison, there was a lot of, just like the letters, they reflected a lot of cultural awareness programs, people coming into prisons. Now that's being cut off state and federal wise, and under the guise of drugs and tightening up and strict. So it's been like that type of evolutionary process, but actual writing letters, Sister Suad, is very important. Definitely if somebody's in prison in your family, you should be writing. And you may connect with writing political prisoners. You can always go to the Jericho website, the Jericho movement.com and see the list of some freedom fighters there. You can always pick one there. Significant number of Muslims there. Dr. Afia Siddiq, well, should I take her? I don't mention her. No, you can't write her. They won't allow her to get a letter. But Imam Jamil Al-Amin, Dr. Matula Shakur, Kamal Siddiqui, Malmin Khabeer, there's many Muslims that are in prison right now that you can write. That's on our website if you just want to send them comments there and help make their day. It's very important. And then send them dawah information. If you're a Muslim, send them what's happening in their community. Ask for their input, their ideas, and things of this nature. It's very important that because when we talk about mass incarceration, use of the 13th Amendment to justify legally while we're still enslaving people in prison and extrapolating their wealth and exploiting them, and the exorbitant times and the percentage, the disproportionate amount of blacks in prison as opposed to anybody else in relationship to the overall population. When we look at these things, letter writing can really maintain somebody's sanity. So I'm going to leave that answer to that like that, Sister Suad, and that writing somebody in prison is very important. Right. And you can organize a family writing thing at your kitchen table. We're all going to write Uncle So-and-so at the end of the month, or if a community writing thing where you can get some treats and snackies, COVID-19 in respect to that. But and get people in community to write your own family members and maybe enter in some political prisoners, many Muslims that you can go to our website and you can see the dozens of Muslims that's in prison that need our help. So we can't abandon them. Yes, indeed.
To that end, actually, so one of the things that we're going to do for Umi's Archive for Black August this month is do a letter writing campaign. So we are partnering with the organization Believers Bailout, which is an organization that is in Umi's lineage, because it's an organization that I helped to found and inspired by her, right, her legacy. And so we're partnering with Umi's Archive. We're going to have an event on August 26th. You can follow us online to see, and we're actually focusing on political prisoners. So we'll be using the list on the Jericho movement website to encourage people to write letters to people, and also advocacy around people's freedom. So that is something that Umi's Archive is going to be working with Believers Bailout to do.
That's tremendous, system. Just make sure you check on the websites of different prisons, those things, because that's a new thing that people. So you don't want all your letters to come back a month later.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you for that suggestion too, because that's. Because we know, and Believers Bailout too, we know all the kind of restrictions. One of the things that really struck me hearing about my mother's work in prisons was just the fact the things that she could do, or that you could do then, that you cannot do now, right? It's just very. I was like, when Jeff told me that he took people out, I was like, you took people out of prison? They let you do that? He was like, yeah. He was like, yeah. He did mention it was like people who were close to release, and there were all these kind of they had to be like, model, right, prisoners or whatever. But still, the idea that the possibility to be educated, those kind of things that have really, like, as mass incarceration has extended itself, so has its cruelty, right, and this inhumanity. And so it increasingly becomes even less and less a place for human beings, right? Like, So the last question I want to ask you before we close out is kind of a broad general question. But, the topic of this, this exhibition is Black Power and its Legacies, right? And so I wonder if you could share. You did a little bit of this with the Panther Party. You talked about, right? You talked about the kind of lesson of state, provocative, the state trying to provoke dissension, right, and ego and things like that. But I'm wondering if you could just say maybe what do you think are some of the legacies of Black Power? Right, or the most important one, or just what is the things you think we need to hold on to, or remember, as we move forward.
I think, in a word, one of the most pronounced ones from the Black Power movement, even as a Muslim, is to hold on to your heritage and your lineage, and be proud of who you are, your full lips, your complexion, You don't have to straighten your hair to be accepted. You don't have to, how can we accentuate our own heritage and our legacy, and not being, even if it's from the way we dress, the way we talk, our basic adab, our diet, how we care for one another, how we check on each other, our interaction with people that's not in our family, and maintaining that adab, that respect. Now, the Black Power movement as a movement itself might have fell short in a lot when it comes down to individual human practices. But the principle of it all, just like the principle of Black August and moving forward, it's you can see a lot of Islam in there. So when so the Black Power movement also would deal with organizations like the Nation of Islam and the Discipline, the Dar Islam before that went through its divisive fitna, without Jalabiyas and Kufis, and that your mom talked about, and being in the community. So two things to answer your question, Trish. So one is being proud of who you are, and that is also the Sunnah of Islam. All right, so the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did, work with people from different demographics and brought us together under one ummah, under one rope of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, but didn't tell anybody to abandon anything. So we should not be trying to be an Arab or somebody from another country. We should be proud of who we are, realize who our history is, and make our connections that way. So it's being proud of who you are. And the second thing from the Black Power movement is being this two things I'm talking about, being proud of who you are. The second thing is developing our own communities and not being so individualistic. Your house with your manicured lawn, a couple of clicks down the road, is a slum, and just being able to let our wealth circulate, because capitalism prides us being rugged individuals doing for yourself. And it's, just not just type of communal collectivism and helping, which is centerpiece of Islam. But it just so happened it's not centerpiece in Black communities.
Be proud of who you are and be in community, right?
Right.
Being collective. All right. Thank you. Those are two powerful, important things. I really appreciate too the way you emphasize. You talk about the cultural revolution, right, and the ways in which, kind of that change, right, like kind of really understanding, loving, and appreciating your Blackness, and with that, that being really significant, right, and that and something that we should hold on to too. So I really appreciate that, and I appreciate you, Brother Jihad, for joining me today. To launch this exhibition, Black Power and Its Legacies. I'm going to close us out. We actually overtime. Supposed to only go an hour, but I thank you for.
Sorry, that's your fault. Though.
It is.
That's all these provocative questions.
Right. So I know it's completely my fault. I take responsibility for that. And I
you.
Extending the time. I want to thank my guest, Brother Abdulmumit, for joining me today. I want to thank my team for Umi's Archive. Right. I want to thank the comments and the questions that we got today from the folks who are watching. I want to let y'all know what's next. So, Umi's Archive started in April. It's a 6-part exhibition. This is 5. So the last exhibition is coming up. That's going to be on September 4th. It's called Distant Relatives with a question mark. And it's on Black ethnicity, identity, and Black freedom. That'll be on September 4th with Professor Professor Joshua Guild. He's a professor at Princeton University. So we'll be talking about that. Then we also will have, like we said, the letter writing. So that's August 26th at 7:30 p.m. That's going to be a Zoom event. They're going to be weekly Instagram lives. So I'll be talking with folks to kind of extend some of the conversation on Thursdays at 7:30. And we're going to be doing some giveaways. So in the spirit of Black August and all the studying and the reading, right, that Brother Jihad was talking about, we're going to be doing some giveaways from Black bookstores of books that come out of sort of Umi's experience that we think that folks should definitely, read so we can learn, right, and continue to learn and grow. So that's what's next for Umi's Archive. Thanks for the tech. Thanks to all the viewers. And we're out. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.